December 8, 1941. Just hours after the first bombs fell on Pearl Harbor, somewhere high above the rugged peaks of northern Luzon, the first Japanese bombers roared through the grey morning sky. But this wasn't Pearl Harbor. This was the Philippines. A sprawling archipelago of islands, mountains, and harbors. And here, Japan would soon confront a battle it could not truly win, not through firepower or strategy, but because the outcome had been shaped months, even years, before the first shot was fired. In late 1941, the Philippines stood at a precarious crossroads, a U.S. Commonwealth still struggling to assert its identity while learning the harsh realities of colonial transition. Its cities, from Manila to the smaller provincial towns, bore the marks of modernization alongside lingering inequalities, but beyond the urban centers lay a landscape of immense strategic significance. Defending this vast and diverse territory was Major General Douglas MacArthur, a man whose reputation for audacity was matched only by the enormous expectations placed upon him. MacArthur carried not only the weight of military responsibility, but also the hopes of a nation and its allies, tasked with holding a line against an enemy whose capabilities seemed almost mythic. Across the Pacific, Japanese forces, battle-hardened from campaigns in China and Southeast Asia, projected an aura of invincibility, their aircraft and troops seasoned in coordinated attacks and swift conquest. Yet beneath this formidable exterior lay a critical flaw, a hidden vulnerability in their plan that few foresaw, and that would ultimately shape the battle before it even began. The Philippines' geography was both a challenge and an ally to those defending it. The archipelago, with its jagged mountain ranges, winding rivers, dense jungles, and hidden coastal inlets, could be merciless to any invader unprepared for its intricacies. These natural features were not mere obstacles. They were living fortresses that offered protection, concealment, and strategic advantage to those who knew how to navigate them. The American and Filipino forces, though outnumbered and outgunned, understood this better than their adversaries. Over years of training, mapping, and local reconnaissance, they had familiarized themselves with every ridge, every river crossing, every narrow pass through the jungle. Soldiers learned to read the land as a guide and an ally, to anticipate ambush points, and to use the environment to slow the enemy's advance. Even simple details, like the patterns of tides in Manila Bay or the best approaches through the Cabuaya River, were studied and memorized, giving defenders an advantage invisible on any map. Intelligence played a subtle but decisive role in shaping the early stages of the campaign. While Japan had amassed detailed operational plans, the defenders' knowledge of local terrain, guerrilla tactics, and potential choke points gave them a quiet edge. Filipino scouts and local informants often spotted Japanese movements long before conventional forces could respond, and their reports were critical in adjusting defensive strategies. One story tells of a small team of Filipino scouts who, knowing the enemy would advance along a predictable route, dismantled bridges, and created false trails that slowed a Japanese column by days. This delay, seemingly small in isolation, allowed reinforcements to consolidate and soldiers to fortify positions in Bataan and other strategic locations. These actions underscored a crucial lesson. Even the most meticulously planned invasion could falter if it underestimated human ingenuity, local knowledge, and the complex interplay between man and landscape. In retrospect, the battle Japan faced in the Philippines was never purely about firepower or numbers. It was about timing, terrain, and the determination of people defending their homeland. The Japanese advance, though impressive on paper, collided with an enemy who had prepared not just to fight, but to endure, to adapt, and to exploit every advantage offered by the land itself. By the moment their troops landed, the stage had already been set against them. The combination of geography, local intelligence, and relentless preparation meant that Japan was facing a battle it could not truly win, a confrontation whose outcome had been shaped long before the first gunshot rang out over Luzon. It was a powerful reminder that in war, as in life, careful preparation, resilience, and the courage to understand and use one's environment can tip the scales in ways that raw strength alone cannot achieve. Long before the first artillery shells screamed across the Abuque, mob online, the real battle was being fought in the minds and hearts of those who would defend the Philippines. Among them stood Captain Juan Pajota, a man whose calm courage and tactical genius became a lifeline for countless soldiers. Stationed near one of the most strategically vital stretches of the Bataan Peninsula, Pajota understood that the Japanese would advance with the confidence of an army trained for speed and precision. Rather than waiting for the inevitable clash, he studied the likely routes of attack and the predictable rhythm of enemy supply convoys. Pajota's brilliance lay not only in anticipating the enemy, but in acting decisively. Under his command, small squads of Filipino and American troops launched night raids that struck convoys, disrupted artillery positions, and sabotaged bridges. Each carefully timed attack was like a heartbeat that pulsed life into the wary defenders, slowing the Japanese advance and giving the outnumbered forces vital hours to regroup, reinforce, and fortify. Pajota's foresight demonstrated that even in the shadow of overwhelming odds, a single mind attuned to strategy and courage could bend the course of events. Beyond the officers and planners, the Philippines' defense was carried on the backs of ordinary men who became extraordinary under fire. Farmers abandoned their fields, teachers laid down chalk for rifles, and clerks traded ledgers for boots and helmets. These men, often with little formal military training, faced enemy forces that outnumbered them, outgunned them, and had a reputation for ruthlessness. Yet time and again, they met the challenge with a resolve that transcended fear. One young Filipino scout, barely out of his teens, crawled for miles behind Japanese lines under the cover of night to deliver crucial intelligence about troop movements. His daring actions provided commanders with the information needed to reposition artillery and intercept enemy columns, delaying assaults that could have overwhelmed defensive positions. For decades, his story went untold, a quiet testament to the countless individuals whose bravery never reached headlines, but whose contributions were vital to the struggle. The courage of these unsung heroes had a multiplying effect. Each act of initiative, each calculated risk, inspired others to act with greater resolve. Soldiers who might have succumbed to despair found renewed strength in the knowledge that their comrades were willing to fight not only for survival, but for the homeland itself. This ripple effect, ordinary people transformed into defenders of extraordinary valor, created an intangible force, one that could never be measured simply by the number of guns or the size of a convoy. The psychological impact on the Japanese forces was profound. They encountered resistance not just from soldiers, but from a population that understood every curve of the terrain, every hidden path through the jungle, and every strategic advantage that could be exploited. History is often written in grand gestures and sweeping victories, but in the Philippines, it was written in quiet moments of courage, foresight, and sacrifice. Captain Pajota and the young scout were not alone. They were emblematic of a generation of Filipinos and Americans who stood firm when the world seemed tilted against them. They remind us that heroism is not defined solely by the outcome of a battle, but by the willingness to act with courage, to anticipate danger, and to stand resolute in the face of overwhelming odds. In the months that followed, their actions would shape the battle in ways that would echo far beyond the shores of Bataan, leaving a legacy of endurance, ingenuity, and unbreakable spirit. In late 1941, Japan's invasion of the Philippines was conceived with confidence bordering on hubris. Operation PH was a meticulously planned campaign designed for speed and decisiveness. Japanese military leaders believed they could capture Manila within days, crush the American and Filipino defenders, and secure the archipelago as a strategic outpost for their broader expansion across Southeast Asia. Their strategy relied on superior numbers, modern weaponry, and the expectation that the local population would be too fragmented or intimidated to mount meaningful resistance. Yet in this calculation lay a critical flaw. They had underestimated the land they sought to conquer and the people who called it home. The lush mountains, winding rivers, and dense jungles of Luzon were not passive terrain to be crossed at will. For those who understood them, they could be transformed into a deadly advantage. The Japanese also misjudged the resolve of the defenders, assuming that American discipline and Japanese experience alone would decide the battle, while overlooking the courage, ingenuity, and cohesion of Filipino and American forces united in defense of their homeland. When Japanese forces advanced toward the Bataan Peninsula, the consequences of these miscalculations became immediately apparent. The defenders, numbering around 80,000 after reinforcements, had spent months fortifying positions, digging trenches, and creating obstacles along every predictable route of advance. The Abuke Moban line, where Captain Juan Pajota and his troops orchestrated night raids, became a particularly formidable challenge. Japanese columns slowed as they were forced to contend not only with artillery fire, but with ambushes, sabotage, and the unrelenting resistance of soldiers who knew every hill, creek, and jungle path. Their superior tanks and artillery, which had made previous campaigns in Asia nearly effortless, were less effective in the dense forests and steep ridges of Bataan. The natural environment amplified the defenders' resilience, and Japan's timetable for conquest began to collapse. Beyond the battlefield, the Japanese army faced unexpected human obstacles. Disease, malnutrition, and exhaustion swept through their ranks. Tropical illnesses such as malaria and dysentery claimed as many soldiers as combat, and the jungle's oppressive heat and humidity drained morale. Meanwhile, the defenders, though also struggling with limited supplies, were buoyed by the knowledge that they were defending their homeland and their communities. Small acts of defiance, like Filipino guerrillas disrupting supply lines or scouts gathering intelligence under cover of night, compounded the Japanese difficulties. These challenges were not simply tactical, they were psychological. Troops trained to expect swift victories were confronted with a reality in which every step forward was contested, every advance uncertain, and every engagement costly. By the time Japanese forces pressed deeper into the peninsula, it became clear that their plan had already faltered. Japan had brought to the Philippines a force prepared for swift conquest, confident in its technological superiority and battlefield experience. Yet they were confronted by a defense shaped by preparation, human courage, and an intimate understanding of the land. The battle they had expected to win quickly became a grinding struggle, a confrontation where strategy, endurance, and spirit overpowered sheer force. In this miscalculation, Japan encountered a truth often overlooked in warfare: victory is never guaranteed, no matter how confident the attacker, when faced with an enemy determined to hold not just ground, but their very identity. The Battle of Bataan, though eventually lost in terms of territory, was won in the hearts, minds, and unyielding resistance of those who refused to surrender easily. By April 1942, the long months of grueling combat on the Bataan Peninsula had taken an immense toll on everyone involved. The surrender of American and Filipino forces marked the end of organized resistance in the region, but it also revealed the staggering human cost of a battle that had been shaped as much by resilience as by firepower. For the Japanese, the triumph they had envisioned so confidently came at a price few of their commanders had anticipated. Thousands of soldiers had died not from bullets or bombs alone, but from the unforgiving conditions of the jungle. Malaria, dysentery, heat exhaustion, and a lack of clean water claimed as many lives as combat itself. Soldiers weakened by disease and starvation struggled to maintain momentum, and the illusion of an unstoppable force began to crumble. The terrain that Japan had underestimated proved relentless, turning every step forward into an exhausting ordeal that drained both body and spirit. On the side of the defenders, the suffering was even more profound, yet it was accompanied by a profound demonstration of courage. Tens of thousands of Filipino and American soldiers endured weeks of constant bombardment, limited food, scarce medical supplies, and the constant threat of enemy attack. Men who had been farmers, teachers, and clerks transformed into soldiers by necessity fought through exhaustion and disease, often relying on sheer determination and camaraderie to survive. Stories from the front lines capture the human dimension of the struggle. Medics worked tirelessly to treat wounds with minimal resources, sharing whatever rations they could spare. Young scouts navigated the jungle under cover of night to relay vital information, and ordinary soldiers dug trenches and reinforced positions, even as hunger gnawed at their strength. Each act, seemingly small in isolation, accumulated into a collective effort that slowed the Japanese advance and left a lasting imprint on the broader war effort. The fall of Bataan, though a tactical victory for Japan, carried deeper strategic implications. that worked against them. The defenders' sacrifice had bought crucial time for the Allies to reorganize and strengthen positions elsewhere in the Pacific. By the time Japanese forces captured the peninsula, their supply lines were stretched thin, and the momentum of their advance had slowed. The cost in men, resources, and morale left the Japanese in a weakened position, forcing them to divert attention and energy to maintain control rather than to push forward with the same speed and efficiency they had initially envisioned. The moral high ground, too, rested with the defenders. While they had been forced to surrender, their perseverance under impossible conditions inspired a sense of pride and unity that would echo in later campaigns and in the collective memory of both nations. The human toll of Bataan serves as a powerful lesson about the limits of force when confronted with preparation, courage, and resolve. The battle demonstrates that victory cannot be measured solely by territory gained or enemy casualties inflicted. It is also defined by the endurance of those who refuse to yield. The Filipinos and Americans who fought on Bataan endured suffering that cannot be quantified in numbers. Yet their actions shifted the trajectory of the war and left a legacy of resilience that still resonates today. Their struggle reminds us that even in apparent defeat, strategic victories can emerge through the courage to stand firm, the intelligence to adapt, and the unyielding belief that the future can be protected, even at the highest cost. The echoes of Bataan are not found only in history books. They live on in every story of perseverance against impossible odds, proving that the human spirit can alter the course of events when all else seems lost. The Battle of Bataan, often remembered for its eventual fall, carries a lesson far greater than the outcome of any single engagement. It reminds us that wars, and indeed all human struggles, are not decided by numbers alone. Japan had brought to the Philippines an army of superior training, technology, and confidence, expecting a swift conquest. Yet from the very first day of resistance, it became clear that preparation strategy and courage could counterbalance raw strength. The Americans and Filipinos may have been outnumbered, but they possessed an intimate understanding of their environment, a deep bond among comrades, and the will to endure despite hardship. This understanding transformed the seemingly ordinary into the extraordinary. Soldiers who had once tended rice paddies or taught in classrooms became architects of delay, masters of terrain, and symbols of steadfastness in the face of overwhelming odds. The human will demonstrated on Bataan resonates, because it reflects a universal truth. Obstacles can be overcome not just through force, but through ingenuity and resolve. Captain Juan Pajota's night raids against Japanese supply lines exemplify this principle. By striking when and where the enemy least expected it, he bought critical time for the defenders, delayed an unstoppable advance, and proved that one person's foresight could ripple outward to affect the course of a larger battle. Countless others. Scouts crawling under the cover of darkness, medics sharing their last rations, soldiers digging trenches in sweltering heat, embodied the same quiet heroism. These were acts of courage and ingenuity that did not merely resist an enemy, they reshaped the terms of the conflict. Bataan's story shows that strategic impact often comes not from bold, flashy victories, but from persistence, preparation, and small acts of brilliance repeated consistently under pressure. The battle also illustrates the role of morale and spirit in human endeavors. Japanese troops, though experienced and confident, were slowed by disease, exhaustion, and the relentless resistance of a population unwilling to surrender. Meanwhile, Filipino and American soldiers, despite facing hunger, illness, and relentless assault, drew strength from their shared purpose. The morale of defenders became a force multiplier, enabling them to hold positions and delay the Japanese timetable. History shows us again and again that battles are won or lost in the hearts of those who fight them. When courage is matched with preparation, knowledge, and tenacity, even overwhelming odds can be resisted. The defenders of Bataan exemplified this principle, demonstrating that an army's spirit can shape the very outcome of a campaign, even when its guns are fewer and its resources limited. Finally, Bataan matters because it teaches a lesson that extends far beyond the battlefield. It is a story of resilience in the face of inevitable hardship, of ingenuity where the odds seem insurmountable, and of the quiet victories that can emerge even in apparent defeat. Japan may have claimed a tactical victory, but strategically, the defenders of Bataan left a legacy that weakened the invader, bought precious time for the Allies, and inspired generations to come. It is a reminder that human will, preparation, and courage are forces that no army can fully calculate or conquer. In the end, Bataan is not just a story of soldiers and battles. It is a testament to the enduring power of determination, the value of preparation, and the truth that even when the odds seem insurmountable, steadfast courage can quietly, decisively, and irrevocably change the course of history. December 8, 1941, dawned over the Philippines like any other day, yet the skies above Luzon would soon erupt with a fury that would echo through history. Japanese bombers rained destruction on airfields, military installations, and cities, signaling the beginning of an invasion that many believed could not be stopped. To the casual observer, the assault seemed overwhelming, unstoppable, a story destined for Japanese triumph. But beneath the smoke, the dust, and the chaos, a different story was unfolding, one written not in immediate victories, but in preparation, courage, and human ingenuity. From the moment the first planes roared overhead, the stage was set not just for a clash of armies, but for a test of human spirit and foresight. The defenders of the Philippines, Americans and Filipinos alike, had already begun their silent battle, shaping it in ways that would ripple far beyond the peninsula, beyond the war itself. The soldiers on the ground, many of them young men far from home, and untested in the full horrors of war, became embodiments of resilience. Captain John Pajota, Filipino officers, and countless unnamed soldiers demonstrated a level of tactical insight and daring that defied expectation. Pajota's night raids on Japanese convoys, executed with limited resources and under the cover of darkness, exemplified how intellect and courage could slow the advance of an enemy far superior in numbers and firepower. Ordinary soldiers, once farmers, teachers, and clerks, became the linchpins of a defense that relied not on overwhelming force, but on intimate knowledge of terrain, improvisation, and an unwavering commitment to protect their homeland. They dug trenches in the tropical heat, endured hunger and disease, and faced an enemy that assumed their surrender was inevitable. Yet they refused. Every act of defiance, no matter how small, became a statement. The battle was not over, and victory could not be claimed merely by arrival or aggression. The significance of Bataan extends far beyond its tactical outcomes. Japan may have eventually captured the peninsula, but the strategic picture tells a different story. Japanese forces were slowed, stretched thin, and drained by the unexpected resilience of their opponents. Thousands of Japanese troops succumbed to disease and exhaustion, and their momentum, the key to their operational plan, faltered. Meanwhile, Filipino and American defenders had bought critical time for the Allies to regroup, reorganize, and prepare for subsequent campaigns. It was a victory not measured in maps or territory, but in endurance, in the preservation of opportunity, and in the demonstration that human will can confront and sometimes overpower brute force. The defenders' courage and foresight became invisible triumphs, shaping the course of the war even in apparent defeat. Ladies and gentlemen, when we reflect on these events, we are reminded that the true lessons of history often lie beyond headlines and battlefield counts. The Battle of Bataan teaches us that victory is sometimes invisible. It is measured not in immediate conquest, but in the courage to stand firm, the ingenuity to adapt, and the refusal to surrender the future before it has even begun. It reminds us that preparation, resolve, and moral courage are as decisive as bullets and bombs. In the skies above Luzon, on the jungled ridges of Bataan, and in the hearts of soldiers who refused to yield, history demonstrated a truth that still resonates, even in moments of apparent loss. Human will can shape events, inspire generations, and leave an indelible mark on the world.